At my daughter's engagement dinner at the vineyard, she stood up with a folder in her hands and set it down in front of me on the white tablecloth. "Sign it," she said. I looked down and felt the floor tilt under my chair. It was a document removing me as trustee of everything I had built, cutting me out entirely. I looked up at her and asked, "Is this really what you want, Hannah?" She didn't blink. She pointed at the signature line and said it loud enough for the whole terrace to hear. "Sign it. You've taken enough from this family already." 60 guests went quiet at once. The kind of quiet you can feel on the back of your neck. Before I get into it, thank you for being here with me tonight. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, your city, your state. I like knowing who's sitting with me while I tell this. And one quick note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. Names and places are coincidental, but the lesson in it is real, and it's one worth keeping. The frost had come early that year. I remember, because I was up before 5, standing at the kitchen window in my socks, watching it settle over the rows of vines like a sheet being pulled over something that was finally allowed to rest. My name is Walter Bryce Holt. I'm 66 years old, and on the morning of October the 9th, I drove my old Chevy through the back roads of the Willamette Valley with a thermos of coffee sweating on the seat beside me and a pair of pruning shears in a canvas bag that used to belong to my father before they belonged to me. Most mornings I don't think much about where I'm driving. I just drive. 31 years I've walked these same rows before the sun's up, checking the drip lines, running my thumb along a leaf to feel if the mildew's coming in early. Folks in town know me as the old caretaker out at Holt Ridge, the quiet fellow who's kept that vineyard running since before most of them were born. That's fine by me. I built it that way on purpose, and there's a reason for that I'll get to. I have 3 children. Marcus, my oldest, runs a hardware supply business 2 towns over. Good man, married, keeps his head down, calls me every Sunday whether he's got something to say or not. Grace, my middle one, teaches 3rd grade in Eugene and still sends me birthday cards in the mail like it's 1,995. God bless her. And then there's Hannah, my youngest, the one I probably loved the hardest, which I've come to understand isn't always the kindest thing you can do to a child. Hannah was 29 that fall, engaged to a man named Preston Cole, and about to take over as general manager of Holt Ridge Vineyard and Cellars, a title I'd given her 18 months earlier because she asked for it, because she said she wanted to prove she could run something real instead of living off whatever people assumed our family had. I respected that. I still do, in the part of me that isn't still sore about how the rest of it went. What none of my children knew, what nobody in this county knew, save for 2 people I trusted with my life, was that the old caretaker owned the whole operation outright. Not a manager, not a hired hand who'd been there so long people forgot to ask. The owner, 91 acres, the cellars, the tasting room, the distribution contracts that shipped Holt Ridge wine to restaurants in 4 states, and a holding company underneath all of it that I'd built up slow and quiet since 1994. The same year, my wife Colleen passed and left me with 3 kids under 10 and a mortgage I paid off within a decade by doing the kind of work I never stopped doing, even after I didn't need to anymore. I kept it quiet for a reason. My own father drilled it into me: money that a child hasn't earned changes how they carry themselves in a room, and not for the better. I watched it happen to men I grew up with, watched their sons turn soft and entitled the day they found out what was waiting for them. I swore I wouldn't do that to mine. So I let them believe their father was a groundskeeper who'd worked the same property so long the family that owned it kept him on out of loyalty. I let them grow up making their own way, and for a long while, I believed that had been the right call. It was Grace who called me about the wedding coordinator first, back in early September. Something in her voice wasn't right. "Dad, does Hannah's fiancé seem, I don't know, like he's in a hurry about something to you?" I hadn't thought much of it. Preston Cole was 34. Sharp-dressed, the kind of man who shook your hand a beat too long and looked you in the eye like he was reading a contract while he did it. He'd come into Hannah's life about a year prior, right around the time I'd handed her the GM title. He worked in what he called hospitality consulting, which as far as I could tell meant he moved from property to property advising owners on how to modernize their operations, and somehow always ended up closer to the ownership structure than the job description called for. I'd had Hollis Adair look into him quietly that same week, Grace called. Hollis had handled my legal affairs since before Hannah was born. And if there was a man in this state I trusted more than my own children with the truth about what I owned, it was him. Nothing criminal, Hollis told me over the phone, in that flat, careful voice he uses when he's about to tell you something you don't want to hear. But he's done this before, Walter. 2 prior situations. Older family business, younger heir he attaches himself to, ends up with his name on paperwork he shouldn't be anywhere near. Nothing ever stuck. He's careful. Careful how? Careful like a man who knows exactly how far the law lets him go before it starts calling it fraud. I sat with that for 3 days before I said anything to anyone. What was I going to do, walk up to my daughter and tell her the man she loved had a pattern? She'd have heard a jealous old man protecting his money, not a father protecting his child. So instead, I watched. I kept doing what I'd always done, pruning the vines before dawn, hauling crates in the cellar, letting Hannah run her meetings and make her calls, and I watched Preston Cole slowly, patiently, start rewriting the story of who had built Holt Ridge into what it was. It started small. He'd mentioned to guests at the tasting room that he and Hannah were modernizing the whole operation. He'd correct people gently when they called Hannah the owner's daughter. Actually, Hannah's the one running this place now. Her father's more of a historical fixture. He said it with a smile every time. Historical fixture. I heard him say it myself, standing not 10 feet away in my work jacket, and he never once looked at me while he said it, because to him, I wasn't anybody worth looking at. By late September, he'd gotten Hannah convinced that I was, in his words, coasting on a legacy he didn't build alone, that the vineyard's real modern success, the restaurant contracts, the tasting room renovation, all of that was Hannah's doing and mine only by inheritance and inertia. It wasn't true. I'd built every piece of it with my own hands and my own capital. But Preston Cole was good the way a man gets good at something he's done 3 times before, and piece by piece, he began separating my daughter from me the way you'd separate a vine from a trellis it had grown too dependent on. Except he made it sound like liberation instead of what it was. I finished the north row that morning and drove to the equipment barn. My foreman, a man named Sal Reyes, who'd worked beside me for 22 years and was one of the only 2 people who knew the truth about what I owned, was inside oiling a chain on the tractor. Preston setting up meetings with Hannah and the accountant. Sal said, not looking up. Wednesday and Friday both. I heard it from Denise in the office. He's not on payroll. He's got no business in those meetings. He's engaged to the woman who'll inherit this place. Walter, try telling him that. I didn't answer, because there wasn't a clean answer. Legally, Sal was right, Hannah was GM. And if she wanted her fiancé sitting in on financial meetings, that was within her authority to allow, even if it wasn't within her authority to grant him anything more than a chair at the table. But I understood, standing there in that barn with the smell of diesel and cut grass, that Preston Cole wasn't attending meetings. He was building a paper trail. And I understood something else, too. Colder and harder to sit with. My own silence. The very thing I'd used for 30 years to protect my children from the corrupting weight of money had left the door wide open for a man like this to walk through it unchallenged, because nobody in that family had the information they needed to see him coming. I want to tell you, the engagement party crept up on me, but that wouldn't be honest. I watched it come the way you watch a storm build over the coast, range slow, visible for days, and somehow still able to catch you standing in the open when it finally breaks. Hannah had chosen the vineyard's event terrace for the party, which struck me at the time as strange, and I understand now was exactly the point. Preston had suggested it. Full circle, he'd told her. Celebrating your future somewhere that means so much to your family's story. What it meant, in practice, was that he wanted the confrontation to happen on my own land, in front of people who worked for me, so that whatever he was planning would carry maximum weight and leave me nowhere to retreat to. 60 guests came that Saturday evening in early October, extended family, longtime customers, 2 of the restaurant owners we supplied, the mayor of the next town over who'd known me since he was a boy, delivering newspapers up our driveway. The terrace was strung with string lights between the old oaks, and the tables were dressed in white with centerpieces of white dahlias that I recognized instantly weren't from Denise's usual florist in town. Someone had brought in a different vendor, Someone had wanted their own signature on the room, and I understood exactly who that someone was before I ever asked. I wore my one good jacket, navy, a little dated, the same one I wear to every wedding and funeral I get invited to, and I stood near the back by the wine barrels, stacked for decoration, the way I always stand at these things, half a guest and half a man, still working the room without a clipboard in his hand. Marcus found me there and put a hand on my shoulder. "You good, Dad?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." I didn't have an answer for him that wouldn't have required explaining 8 months of quiet investigation I hadn't told a single one of my children about. So I told him I was tired, which wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Dinner went the way these things go: toasts, laughter, Grace crying a little during her speech about her baby sister finding somebody who sees her for who she really is, which landed different in my ears than I think she intended. Preston stood to give his own toast around 8:30, glass raised, that same too long eye contact sweeping the room. "I want to thank this family," he said, "for welcoming me in the way you have, and I want to thank Hannah for showing me what it means to build something real instead of just inheriting it." A ripple of polite laughter went through the tables. Nobody caught it but me, the knife folded so gently into a toast that half the room mistook it for a compliment. Hannah stood up not long after, folder already in her hand, and I understood in that moment that whatever was coming had been planned for weeks, that the folder hadn't been an impulse, that my daughter had walked into her own engagement party with a document already drafted and notarized, ready to end something in front of 60 witnesses because someone had convinced her it needed to be public to be real. She set it down in front of me. "Sign it," she said. I opened the folder with hands that had split more cords of firewood than I could count and had never once shaken doing it. And they were steady now too, though everything behind my ribs was not. It was a formal transfer of trusteeship language dense enough that most people in that chair would have signed it out of confusion alone, removing me as trustee of the Holt family holdings and naming Hannah, effective immediately, with Preston listed as co-trustee pending their marriage the following spring. "Is this really what you want, Hannah?" I asked her. "Sign it," she said, louder now, loud enough that conversation at the nearby tables died. "You've taken enough from this family already. I want you to understand something about that sentence, because it's the one that still wakes me up some nights. Taken, not held back, not kept from us. Taken as though I'd stolen something from my own children by choosing, for 30 years, to shoulder the risk and the labor of building it myself, so they wouldn't have to grow up carrying the weight of it before they'd earned the strength for it." I looked around that terrace. 60 faces, half of them frozen mid-bite, mid-sip, mid-sentence. I found Sal at the back, arms crossed, jaw tight, the only other man on that property who understood exactly what was in that folder and exactly what it would mean if I signed it. I found Preston, standing just behind Hannah's shoulder with his hand resting there. Not gripping, just resting. Proprietary. The hand of a man who believes he has already won. I picked up the pen. I thought about my father, standing in these same rows in 1974 with nothing but a mortgage and a stubborn refusal to fail. I thought about Hannah at 7 years old, riding on my shoulders down the second row while I checked the trellis wire, laughing so hard she nearly knocked my hat off. I thought about the folder in my truck's glove box that I'd carried to this party without telling a single soul, because some part of me, the part that had watched Preston Cole for 8 months, had known, somewhere under the hope, that it might come to this. "Before I sign anything," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected, which made the whole terrace lean in to hear it. "I think there's someone here who should say a few words first." Hannah frowned. "Dad, don't." "I'm not doing anything, sweetheart. I'm introducing a guest." Hollis Adair had been sitting 3 tables back the entire evening, in a gray suit, nursing a glass of the vineyard's own Pinot, looking for all the world like any other family friend invited to celebrate. He stood now, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward us, carrying a leather folio I recognized from 100 closings and contract signings over the decades. Preston's face did something small and fast, a flicker, gone almost as quick as it came, but I'd spent 8 months learning to watch for exactly that flicker, and I caught it. "Cormac, sorry, Walter," Hollis said, catching himself with a small smile that told the room he knew this family well. "Would you like me to proceed?" "Please." "Good evening, everyone. My name is Hollis Adair. I've served as legal counsel to the Holt family since 1989. He turned, not to Hannah, but to the 60 guests, to the mayor and the restaurant owners and the aunts and uncles who had come to celebrate a marriage and were about to witness something else entirely. I want to bring a matter to everyone's attention, because I believe everyone in this room deserves to understand exactly what document is currently sitting in front of Mr. Holt. Preston's hand came off Hannah's shoulder. "This is a private family matter," he said, and his voice had lost the warmth it carried during his toast. "I don't think—" "You're welcome to think whatever you like, Mr. Cole," Hollis said, not raising his voice at all. "But you should know that I've spent the last 8 months reviewing your history at Mr. Holt's request, and I'd be doing this family a disservice if I let this signature happen without every person here understanding the full picture." The terrace had gone dead silent, the kind of silence you could hear the string lights humming through. "This document," Hollis continued, lifting a page from his folio, "removes Mr. Holt as sole trustee of Holt Ridge Vineyard and Cellars, and the holding company beneath it, Bryce Family Holdings, LLC. I have reviewed the transfer language personally. It is not a simple administrative update, as I understand it was represented to be. It is a full transfer of trusteeship over assets currently valued, at last appraisal, at $81 million. $81 million. The number went into that terrace like a stone dropped into still water. I watched it travel, the small movements of heads turning, Marcus's fork stopping halfway to his mouth, the mayor setting his glass down slow and careful, like the table itself might not be steady anymore. Hannah's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "Dad," she said, and it came out smaller than anything I'd heard from her since she was a girl. "That's not Preston said this was just updating the operational structure, so I could actually run things without having to run everything through you. I understand that's what you were told," Hollis said gently, and it was the gentleness in his voice, more than anything, that seemed to break something loose in the room. But I'd like to walk through a few facts, if I may, because I think they matter here." He turned another page. "Mr. Preston Cole is not, and has never been, an owner or trustee of any Holt family asset. He has no legal standing in this document beyond what is being granted to him tonight, for the first time, as co-trustee. I would also like the room to know that Mr. Cole has appeared under 2 other names, in similar circumstances with 2 other families in Sonoma and Walla Walla over the past 6 years. In both instances, he became engaged to the daughter of a family business owner. In both instances, engagement was followed within a year by an attempt to restructure ownership documents. In neither instance did the engagement result in marriage. You could have heard a leaf fall off one of those oak trees." Preston's mouth opened, and for the first time all evening, nothing measured or rehearsed came out of it. Those are unrelated situations. That has nothing to do with— I have the documentation here, if anyone would like to see it," Hollis said, and set the folio down on the table, open, patient, unhurried, the way a man sets down a hand of cards he already knows has won. "I watched my daughter's face while she understood it, not the way news lands when you hear it and take it in all at once, but the slow way it lands when a person is rebuilding, piece by piece, an entire version of the last year of her life." She looked at Preston. She looked at the folder still sitting open in front of me, pen resting on the signature line. She looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Not angry, not yet. Just asking." "I tried to protect you from having to know things you weren't ready to know," I said. "I see now that protecting you and informing you aren't always the same thing, and I got that wrong. I'm sorry, Hannah. I should have told you what I had Hollis looking into the day I found out." Marcus stood up first, came around the table, and put himself between Preston and the rest of the family, without a word, not threatening, just present, the way a son stands when a father's finally been seen clearly for what he's carried alone. Grace had her hand over her mouth. Sal, at the back of the terrace, hadn't moved an inch, arms still crossed, watching it play out exactly the way I imagine he'd pictured it more than once over those 8 months. Preston looked around that terrace at 60 faces that had, 10 minutes earlier, been raising glasses to him, and I watched him do the math that men like him always do in the end, the math where the room has turned and there's no toast left to give that will turn it back. "Hannah," he started. "Don't," she said. Just that, one word, and something in her voice had gone hard in a way I hadn't heard from my daughter before, and haven't heard since in quite that register, though I've heard echoes of it. She looked at him a long moment, then reached down, picked up the folder, closed it, and set it back down in front of me, unsigned. "I'd like you to leave," she said to him. "Tonight, before dessert." He left. I won't pretend there was a scene beyond that there wasn't, not really. He walked off that terrace with 60 pairs of eyes on him and got into a car and drove off our property. And as far as I know, that was the last time anyone in this family ever spoke to Preston Cole. The party didn't end, not exactly, though it changed shape entirely. Somebody, I think it was the mayor's wife, quietly told the band to keep playing, softer, and people drifted back into smaller conversations, the way a crowd does after a storm passes through, still a little stunned but needing somewhere to put their hands and their eyes. I sat back down at the head table, and Hannah sat down next to me, and for a long while neither of us said anything at all. $81 million, she said finally, quiet, like she was testing whether the number would feel any more real out loud. "I never wanted that number to be the reason any of you looked at me different," I said. "That's why I kept it quiet as long as I did. My father used to say money changes how a young person carries themselves in a room before they've earned the right to carry it. I believe that. I still believe it mostly. But I think I let a good reason turn into an excuse to keep something from you that you had every right to know, especially once a man like that came into your life. That part was my failure, not yours. I would have listened to you," she said. "If you'd told me about him in September, when Grace first said something was off, I would have listened." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you'd have heard a jealous old man trying to protect his money, same as I was afraid you would. I don't know which, honestly. I only know I chose silence, and silence isn't protection. It's just a door left open for somebody else to walk through first." She laughed, short and a little wet. "You sound like Grandpa August used to. He was smarter than me about most things. He told his kids what the land was worth the day he bought it. Never hid a dollar of it. Said a family that doesn't know what it's protecting can't protect it." We sat with that a while, the string lights swaying a little in the evening wind coming up off the valley, and around us the party kept finding its footing again in small pieces. Grace laughing at something Marcus said, the mayor coming by to shake my hand a beat too long, the way people do when they've just watched something they'll be telling their spouses about in the car ride home. Sal came by near the end of the night, when most of the guests had gone and it was just family lingering over the last of the wine. He didn't say much. Sal never does, just set a hand on my shoulder the way Marcus had earlier, and gave me the same small nod he'd given me in the equipment barn 8 months back, the one that meant he understood more than either of us needed to say out loud. Hannah stayed trustee. That part I never changed my mind about. She'd earned it, GM title and all, long before Preston Cole ever set foot on this property, and I wasn't about to let one man's scheme cost her something she'd built with her own 2 hands. What changed was smaller and larger at the same time. I told her everything. That night, and over the weeks that followed, the full number, the holding company, the 4 state distribution contracts, all of it, sitting at my kitchen table with the same coffee thermos between us that I'd carried in my truck that morning before it all started. Marcus and Grace, too. No more historical fixture, no more old caretaker, just their father, finally letting them see the whole shape of what he'd spent a lifetime building, instead of only the parts he'd decided they were ready for. I still get up before 5 most mornings. I still walk the rows in my work jacket with pruning shears in that canvas bag, because that work was never about needing the money. It was about a man wanting to know, every single day, that what he built still deserved the hands he built it with. Hannah walks with me some mornings now, coffee in hand, asking questions she never used to know to ask, and I answer every one of them. Money was never the thing anybody in this story actually wanted. Not really. Not the ones worth keeping close, anyway. What Hannah wanted, underneath all of it, was simply to know her father, the whole of him, not the version he'd decided was safe to show. What I'd gotten wrong for 30 years wasn't the hard work or the humility. It was believing that love and honesty could be separated, that I could give my children one without ever fully giving them the other. I know better now. It cost me almost losing a daughter to learn it, and I'll carry that lesson the rest of my days, out in those rows, before the sun's up, same as always. If this story reached you tonight, I hope you'll sit with it a while. I hope you'll think about what you're protecting the people you love from, and ask yourself honestly whether it's protection at all, or just a silence that's waiting for someone else to fill it first. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I read every one. And if somebody in your life needs to hear this tonight, send it their way. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.